Could granting fathers rights in abortion decisions lead to coercion, compromising women's independent choices? How should the emotional and psychological experiences of fathers be considered in abortion debates? Should both parents' perspectives be prioritized to ensure decisions are more child-centered?
Welcome back to the Mass Debate channel, where we tackle the tough topics head-on. In today's episode, we explore the complexities of fathers' rights in abortion decisions. Join us as we dive into the emotional, legal, and ethical dimensions of this controversial issue. If you enjoy a balanced perspective on tough topics, help the channel. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.
All right, so today we're diving deep into a topic that's pretty complex and often, emotionally charged. Fathers' rights and abortion.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And, you send over a whole range of sources. So we have like legal analyses from findlaw.com, arguments, from both sides of the debate. We even have a study that looks at the neuroscience of fatherhood, like how dad's brains actually change.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, right? We tend to really focus on women's rights when we talk about this, which is, of course, fundamental.
Right.
But these sources that we have, they kind of give us a chance to explore a perspective that I don't think gets as much attention. The perspective of the father.
Exactly. It's about understanding the whole picture.
Yeah.
And that includes the legal side of things, ethical arguments, the social impact, and even what's happening biologically.
Yeah, because if you think about it, this isn't, just some abstract legal debate. It really touches on like the very nature of parenthood itself.
Right.
How we define it, who has a say, and what responsibilities come with it.
Absolutely. So let's start with the legal landscape in the U.S.
Okay.
Findlaw.com highlights some key Supreme Court decisions that have really shaped, how we think about this issue.
And what's fascinating is how those rulings have evolved over time.
Yeah.
Like we can go all the way back to 1976 with Planned Parenthood v. Danforth.
Okay.
Where the court said that requiring a husband's consent for an abortion was unconstitutional.
So it seems like the court recognized, pretty early on that giving fathers, veto power over a woman's decision would create a real imbalance of power.
Exactly. And then you have Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1992, which went a step further and said that even notifying the father could be an undue burden on the woman, especially in cases involving abuse or strained relationships.
So as it stands now, no state actually requires a father's consent or even notification before an abortion.
Yeah, right. But here's where things get a little bit murky.
Okay.
Dobbs v. Jackson, the ruling in 2022 that overturned Roe v. Wade, that kind of shook things up.
Yeah.
It gave states a lot more control over abortion laws, but it didn't explicitly address fathers' rights.
So we're left with this like legal gray area.
Right.
It's like Dobbs essentially opened the door for states to potentially revisit this whole question of, fathers' rights in abortion decisions.
Exactly. And that's where the ethical and social arguments become even more crucial to consider.
Right.
Our sources present some really compelling points on both sides of this debate.
Yeah. On one hand, you have, the argument for shared responsibility in conception.
Right.
Like, after all, it does take two people to create a child.
It does. And those who support fathers' rights often highlight the emotional impact that an abortion can have on men.
Yeah.
There's this feeling of being excluded from, a life-altering decision. They also argue that, involving fathers could actually lead to decisions that are more focused on the well-being of the child.
Okay. On the other side, you have, those who emphasize the fundamental importance of a woman's bodily autonomy.
Right.
Pregnancy has a direct impact on a woman's body and health in a way that it just simply doesn't for men.
And let's be realistic, the consequences of pregnancy, the physical changes, the potential, disruptions to a woman's education or career, those fall disproportionately on women.
Absolutely. And those legal precedents that we were talking about, Casey and Danforth, really reinforce this point.
Yeah.
There's also the very real concern about potential coercion. If fathers are given legal rights in these decisions, it could open the door for them to pressure women even unintentionally. And that ultimately undermines a woman's ability to make a truly independent choice.
It raises a really important question, like how do we balance these competing interests?
Right.
It's such a sensitive and multifaceted issue.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
And then you bring financial abortion into the equation, and things get even more heated.
Right. So the term financial abortion refers to this idea that a father could have the legal right to opt out of financial responsibility for a child before it's born.
Okay.
Similar to how a woman can choose to terminate a pregnancy.
It comes from the fact that even if a father objects to the pregnancy, he's still legally obligated to pay child support after the baby is born.
Right, and this is where you see that tension between individual rights and the responsibility of caring for a child once that child is brought into the world.
Yeah.
You know, there was a really compelling case in Michigan where a father actually tried to challenge child support payments.
Oh, wow.
Because his ex-partner chose to have the baby against his wishes.
So he was basically saying that men should have the same right to opt out of parenthood as women do.
Yeah, he argued that.
Okay.
But the court ultimately prioritized the child's right to financial support.
It really encapsulates, the complexities we're dealing with here.
It does.
And here's the interesting part. Right now, no state actually allows a father to completely opt out of fatherhood, even if he were to terminate his parental rights.
It highlights how deeply ingrained that societal expectation is that biological fathers are financially responsible for their children.
So while financial abortion generates a lot of debate,
Yeah.
it's crucial to remember that it's not a legally recognized concept at this point.
Which brings us to the policy perspective.
Okay.
One of the sources that you sent me, the Center for American Values, advocates for a very specific approach to this whole issue.
They're interesting because they believe that securing fathers' rights, NAD, enforcing their responsibilities, could actually lead to a decrease in the number of abortions.
Yeah, their idea is that if you implement measures like requiring pre-abortion paternal notifications and encourage negotiated agreements where fathers take on full custody, you could potentially prevent some abortions from happening in the first place.
It's definitely a controversial stance, but it's worth considering.
It is, and they have some data to back up their claims.
Okay.
They've conducted surveys showing that a large majority of Americans, over 70%, believe that a man is financially responsible for a child from the moment of conception.
Wow.
And over 60% believe that fathers should be notified before an abortion takes place.
So even though the legal landscape might be a bit unclear right now, these surveys suggest that there's significant public support for the idea that fathers have both rights and responsibilities when it comes to pregnancy.
Exactly.
It definitely adds another layer to this conversation.
Yeah, it does.
Especially as states are now grappling with the implications of the Dobbs ruling.
Speaking of adding layers, our deep dive takes us to Latin America next.
Okay.
Where the O'Neill Institute highlights how arguments around paternity rights are being used in a completely different way.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
It's almost a mirror image of what we're seeing in the U.S. In Latin America, these paternity rights arguments are actually being used to oppose legal abortion.
Exactly. The O'Neill Institute points to cases in Uruguay, Colombia, and Argentina where preliminary injunctions based on fathers' rights actually prevented women from accessing abortion services.
Wow. It's a stark reminder that the legal and social context surrounding these issues can vary so much around the world.
Absolutely. And the arguments being used are fascinating. One common tactic is to invoke the presumption of paternity within marriage.
Okay.
Which essentially means that if a couple is married, the husband automatically has rights related to the fetus.
So they're basically saying that a woman can't make decisions about her pregnancy without her husband's involvement simply because they're married.
Exactly. Another argument revolves around this concept of a joint life project between spouses.
Okay.
It implies that a woman can't unilaterally decide to end a pregnancy because it disrupts this shared vision of their future.
It seems like they're overlooking the fact that pregnancy has such a profound impact on a woman's body and well-being.
Right.
And that she's the one who carries the burden of those physical and emotional changes.
Precisely.
Yep.
And then there's this third argument that draws a parallel to post-birth financial obligations.
Okay.
The reasoning is if a father is legally obligated to pay child support after the baby is born, shouldn't he have a say before the baby is even born?
So they're using the financial responsibility argument as leverage to claim decision-making power over the pregnancy itself.
Exactly. But here's where the O'Neill Institute's analysis is so valuable.
Okay.
They systematically debunk these arguments, pointing out how they often misinterpret legal concepts and prioritize paternal interests over women's autonomy.
So, for example, they highlight how the presumption of paternity was originally intended to establish parentage for children born within a marriage.
Right.
Not to give men control over a woman's reproductive choices.
Exactly. And as for that joint life project idea,
Yeah.
they argue that it completely disregards the immense physical and emotional toll that pregnancy takes on a woman.
Right.
Not to mention, the potential risks to her health and well-being.
It's such a stark contrast to the emphasis on women's bodily autonomy that we've seen in U.S. legal precedents.
Absolutely. The O'Neill Institute does a fantastic job of dissecting these arguments and really exposing how they're being used to undermine women's reproductive rights in Latin America.
It's clear that this issue is being, debated and litigated on a global scale with, far-reaching consequences. But okay, get ready for a major shift in gears.
Okay.
We've covered legal and ethical ground. Now prepare for an aha moment. We're moving into the realm of biology, the paternal brain.
This is where that study on the paternal brain comes in, and it's truly mind-blowing. It turns out that becoming a father isn't just a social transformation, it's a neurological one as well.
So we're not just talking about dads getting sentimental and changing diapers. Their brains are actually rewiring themselves.
You got it. This fMRI study showed that specific regions in fathers' brains actually light up when they're exposed to child-related stimuli, like pictures of their kids or the sound of their baby crying.
Okay, let's break this down. What's actually happening in their brains?
So the study identified 3 main networks involved in this paternal brain transformation. First, there's the mentalizing network, which includes areas like the superior temporal sulcus, STS, and the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC.
And these areas help dads understand their child's mental and emotional state, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's like they're developing a deeper level of empathy for their little ones.
Exactly. Then there's the embodied simulation network involving areas like the insula and the superior frontal gyrus, SFG. This network promotes an emotional connection and mirroring between a father and his child.
So when a dad sees his baby smile, his brain is essentially experiencing a mini version of that same joy.
Yeah.
It's like they're literally feeling what their baby is feeling.
That's a great way to put it. And finally, we have the emotion regulation network, which includes areas like the inferior frontal gyrus, IFG, and the orbitofrontal cortex, OFC. This network is all about helping dads respond to their child's needs in a calm and appropriate way and form those lasting memories.
So it's this network that allows dads to stay composed, during a meltdown and still be the fun-loving parent their child needs.
You nailed it. But here's a detail that really fascinated me. The anterior insula, which is crucial for babies in developing a sense of self, is highly active in fathers, too.
Wow. So in a way, dads' brains are developing right alongside their babies' brains.
Yeah.
It makes sense when you think about it. They're both undergoing this massive transition into parenthood.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. It highlights the interconnectedness of this experience.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey from the intricacies of U.S. law to the heart of the paternal brain. We've explored ethical dilemmas, social implications, and even ventured into the legal landscapes of Latin America. It's remarkable how much there is to uncover when we delve into such a complex issue.
It's a testament to the power of curiosity and the importance of exploring diverse perspectives.
But okay, let's bring it all together. What does all of this mean?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that the question of fathers' rights in abortion decisions is far more nuanced than it's often portrayed. It's not a simple men versus women or rights versus responsibilities scenario.
Right.
It's about recognizing that there are different yet equally valid perspectives at play.
And it's about having, open and honest conversations that acknowledge the complexity of this issue.
Precisely.
Conversations just like this one, hopefully.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I think there's one final thought-provoking question we should leave our listener with.
Okay.
And it stems from what we've learned about the paternal brain. If a father's brain demonstrably changes in response to his child, does this strengthen the arguments for his involvement in pre-birth decisions? Or does it raise even more questions about how biology interacts with social and legal rights? Food for thought.
That's an excellent question, and one that I'm sure will continue to be debated as we learn more about the paternal brain and the multifaceted nature of fatherhood.
Yeah, it really does make you think, knowing that dads are going through these biological changes, how does that impact how we view their role in these decisions about pregnancy?
Yeah, it's a question that adds another layer of complexity to an already very intricate issue.
We've been exploring all these sources that you sent on fathers' rights and abortion, and it's been quite a journey.
It has.
We've gone from Supreme Court cases to global perspectives, from ethical debates to like a deep dive into the paternal brain.
And what's striking is how interconnected all these different aspects are,
Right.
It's not just about legal rights or biological changes in isolation.
Yeah.
It's about how they all intertwine and influence each other.
For example, we talked about how Planned Parenthood v. Danforth and Casey, affirmed a woman's right to choose without needing a father's consent or even notification.
Right.
Those rulings really emphasize a woman's bodily autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
But then the paternal brain study suggests that there's a biological reality for fathers, too.
Right. It prompts the question. How do we balance those realities?
Yeah.
The legal precedents are very clear. But what about the emotional and biological experiences of fathers?
Right.
Is there a way to acknowledge and respect those without undermining women's autonomy?
It's a tough question, and, one that's sparked a lot of debate.
It has.
You shared some sources that present compelling arguments on both sides.
Mm.
On one hand, you have this idea of shared responsibility in conception and the very real emotional impact of abortion on men.
And those who advocate for fathers' rights often argue for a more child-centric approach,
Right.
recognizing that a child's well-being is also a central part of this equation.
Right.
But on the other side, there's that concern that giving fathers legal rights in this decision could create opportunities for coercion, putting undue pressure on women.
And you can't ignore the fact that pregnancy, with all its physical and emotional changes, directly affects a woman's body and life in a way that it doesn't for men.
Absolutely. And that's why the work of the O'Neill Institute is so important.
Right.
They're challenging these attempts to use paternity rights arguments as a way to restrict access to abortion, particularly in Latin America.
Right.
They've done a great job debunking, some pretty misleading interpretations of legal concepts that prioritize paternal interests over women's autonomy.
It's a good reminder that this isn't just a theoretical debate.
Yeah.
It's playing out in real life legal battles around the world.
Right.
And even in the U.S., after the Dobbs ruling, we're now in this legal gray area where the question of fathers' rights in abortion could easily resurface.
Right. And that's where those policy perspectives we discussed come into play.
Yeah.
The Center for American Values, for example, proposes that securing fathers' rights, Andy, enforcing their responsibilities, could actually lead to fewer abortions.
Their reasoning is that if fathers are more involved from the beginning, perhaps through pre-abortion notifications or agreements where they assume full custody, it could potentially change the trajectory of some pregnancies.
Right.
They even have data suggesting that there's significant public support for these ideas.
It's a controversial stance, for sure.
Yeah.
But it does add another dimension to this conversation.
Right.
It suggests that maybe there's a way to approach this issue that considers the rights and responsibilities of both parents while also prioritizing the well-being of the child.
So after this deep dive, what have we learned?
What?
It's clear that the question of fathers' rights in abortion isn't black and white.
It's not.
There are strong arguments on both sides, each grounded in legal precedents, ethical considerations, societal norms, and even these fascinating biological realities we've explored.
And that's precisely why it's crucial to approach this issue with nuance and empathy, recognizing the complexities of the choices involved and the deeply personal nature of this debate.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information.
It has.
But it's just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
We've given you a lot to think about. But now it's your turn.
Yeah.
Keep exploring these issues.
Yeah.
Do your own reading and research and engage in thoughtful discussions with others. The more we understand the complexities, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this challenging terrain.
And as we continue to learn more about the paternal brain and the ever-evolving nature of fatherhood, this conversation will only become more nuanced and thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It's a journey of discovery that we're all on together.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Life's a twist when it comes to choice. Father's rights, hear both voices. It's a conversation, share responsibility, balancing scales in every community. Both sides matter, equal say. Together we can find a better way. Not just a battle, it's about unity. Choose together, building stronger family. Father's rights, let's discuss it right. Balancing our future, igniting